It's weird that the fourth movie in both the original and second Godzilla series would be well received by fans and critics, and I just don't get it. Godzilla vs. Mothra came out in 1992, and sometimes in the United States it's known as Godzilla and Mothra: The Battle for Earth. That's what it's said on the VHS covers, the DVD cases, and the Blu-ray cases, but it's just easier to say Godzilla vs. Mothra. Funny, because Mothra vs. Godzilla would sometimes be referred to as Godzilla vs. Mothra, but I'm not going down that route of confusion. But anyway, a meteor crashes into the Pacific Ocean, and not only reveals a giant egg that belongs to Mothra, but it also reawakens another monster that looks very similar to Mothra, but more evil, called Batra. It's explained that there was an ancient civilization thousands and thousands of years ago that tried to control the weather, and Earth, which I guess has a mind of its own, was pissed off about it, so they created Batra, but Batra just got too far out of control and started destroying the Earth himself. So Mothra came in, defeated Batra, and both monsters just went into hibernation, I guess, until that meteor crashed into the planet. So now both monsters have been revealed, Mothra's egg hatches, and it's only a matter of time before Mothra and Batra meet up once again and face off to the death. Oh, yeah, and Godzilla's in this movie. For some reason. He just pops up. Now this movie's directed by Takao Okawara, who would go on to direct 3 more Godzilla movies after this. And in terms of Kazuki Omori, he's back, but only as the writer. I guess somebody told him, look, we can't have you directing Godzilla movies if you're gonna villainize other countries. Just stop it. We got enough shit from Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. We can't let you take full control over a Godzilla movie from now on. But anyway, this movie is regarded as one of the best of the second series, probably the best by a lot of people. It's the highest grossing film of the second series, and because it sparked a re-interest in Mothra, it spawned a spin-off trilogy, the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, which I've already reviewed. And all that being said, I don't get this movie at all. I don't get why it's the highest grossing film of the second series. I don't get why people regard this as the best of the second series. And furthermore, I don't understand why I even gave it the rating I gave it when I reviewed it 5 years ago. I was looking back at my original review for Godzilla vs. Mothra, and 2 things went through my mind watching it. A, oh my god, I am so awful at this stuff, why didn't I stop? But luckily I got better. The second thing that went through my mind was, what the fuck was I thinking? Worth seeing in your lifetime? Are you out of your goddamn mind, Alexander from 5 years ago? It's funny, I start turning into a YouTube commenter like, you should stop reviewing movies because my opinion doesn't jive with yours. But in all seriousness, out of all the Godzilla movies in the second series, this is the one that I have watched the least. It's the one that I remember the least, and watching this again with an adult perspective, like I said, I don't get it. I don't get it at all. And the reason I don't get the praise for this is probably because Godzilla's pointless. He has no reason whatsoever to be in this movie at all. Godzilla first appears and fights both Mothra and Batra, and during his underwater fight with Batra, which by the way looks terrible because you can barely see a thing, both monsters get consumed by an underwater volcano, and that's the end of the first act. And then Godzilla doesn't pop up again until the beginning of Act 3, where he swims through the lava flow onto the mainland, where he emerges from another volcano, making his way to Yokohama. I will give the movie this, though. After saying all that, it really has reminded me of how badass Godzilla is. He survives molten lava and swims through it to get to another area of Japan. But getting back to him feeling pointless, when Godzilla pops up again, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot you were in this movie. A movie with Godzilla in the title that's marketed as a Godzilla movie made me forget that its title monster was actually in the film. That is not good in the slightest. Because this is more of a Mothra movie more than anything. The plot revolves around Mothra, the backstory revolves around Mothra, Godzilla just pops up in the wrong place at the wrong time. And it doesn't even harken back to events from the previous films, because the one thing all the previous films in the second series have done was acknowledge each other, and Godzilla was vital to each plot, because in The Return of Godzilla, it revolved around Godzilla's return after 30 years. In Godzilla vs. Biollante, it revolved around a monster that was created through Godzilla cells, and in Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, it revolves around possibly erasing Godzilla from history after we find out what his origin is. And in the movie I'm going to talk about tomorrow, the plot there revolves heavily around Godzilla. This movie does not. Godzilla feels more like an afterthought, so I don't know if it was planned as a Godzilla movie or if it was planned as a Mothra movie and they just threw in Godzilla at the last minute. Whatever the case, when it came to Godzilla, they fucked up royal. They even couldn't get the sound effects for his atomic beam correctly. It sounds more like a laser beam in this one. It reminds me of in Star Wars Rebels when the X-Wings show up and they don't even get the right blaster sounds for X-Wings. It's just one of those things that as a nerd, as a fan of this series, it irritates me. Let's talk about everything that revolves around Mothra. I'm not a big fan of the design, I'll have to say, because it's just too fluffy. It looks really fake. And for those of you wondering, oh, you just hate Mothra, that's why you're not a big fan of this movie or Mothra vs. Godzilla. I don't. Mothra is one of my favorite monsters in the Godzilla universe, and the original Mothra from 1962 is my favorite Toho science fiction movie that doesn't involve Godzilla. So I love Mothra, but there's something about this and Mothra vs. Godzilla that just don't really click to me. And at first when this movie opens up, okay, you know what, there's no way I can get around this. When the movie opens up, it is a direct ripoff of Raiders of the Lost Ark. The opening scene to Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, when Indiana Jones goes into the temple, steals the idol, the temple's collapsing, he gets out, but then he's encountered by his arch rival and gives up the idol so he can live. In this movie, they have the main character raiding a temple who is dressed exactly like Indiana Jones, raiding something in the temple's collapsing, he gets out, but then he's arrested and is soon bailed out by his ex-wife. Those last two things that I mentioned are the only thing that differentiate the opening of this scene to the opening of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And it should be noted that Kazuki Amore was the writer for both Godzilla vs. Biollante and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah, and both those movies had to rip off something from America. Biollante ripped off Little Shop of Horrors just because of Biollante, and Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah ripped off Terminator 2. And then there's one more Godzilla movie that he's the writer of where he rips off another thing from America, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But once we get past the obvious ripoff, I was actually kind of on board with it, because you got these two divorced characters who are trying to rekindle their relationship, work together to accomplish this goal. But then the movie just throws them aside once we get to the second act, which is nothing but a remake of the original Mothra. After Godzilla and Batra are consumed by the lava, it turns into a remake of Mothra, where the twin fairies, known as the Cosmos, are kidnapped by this businessman who's not an entertainer this time around. And then they call for Mothra to come to Tokyo to help them. Mothra has a brief fight with the self-defense forces in the ocean, where she kills people. She rampages across Tokyo, where she kills more people, saves the fairies, and then cocoons herself next to a monument in Tokyo. In the original, it was Tokyo Tower. In this one, it's the Capitol building. And then the characters are thrown to the side even more once the big final battle between Godzilla, Mothra, and Batra takes place, because they do the thing that I don't like Godzilla movies for doing. Whenever the Godzilla movies have no clue what to do with their characters, once we get to the finale, they just have them standing on a roof watching the action. They are just totally useless at that point, and it's something I don't like. Now, I will give the movie this. There are things that I do like about it. I don't dislike this movie. I don't think it's terrible. It's just mediocre. One thing I do like is Batra. Even though he's pretty much the Black Mothra, and they even call him the Black Mothra before his official name is given, he can be pretty menacing. He's an evil-looking caterpillar with a giant horn that shoots lightning. He shoots lightning from his eyes. His larva form is as big as Godzilla, so that's pretty terrifying. And his adult form is pretty haunting as well. The one little nitpick I have with Batra is that his roar is nothing but Rodan's roar, just at a lower pitch. And it's not something with King Ghidorah's roar in the last movie where it's a modified Rodan roar. No, they just took Rodan's roar and just pitched it down. But nevertheless, Batra is an enjoyable monster and kind of proves to be a good foil for Mothra. But one other thing that I just don't like, this is something where the movie breaks its own rules. During the fight between Mothra and Batra in Yokohama, Batra is kicking Mothra's ass, and there's a point where he's about to kill Mothra. And then Godzilla pops up and starts attacking Batra. The two monsters fight, and then Batra nearly gets killed by Godzilla because it's Godzilla. But then, for no reason whatsoever, they don't really explain why, Mothra saves Batra, and the two monsters all of a sudden team up. And it's not a thing where Batra has a change of heart. No, Mothra comes in, saves the day, hurts Godzilla and knocks him out for a bit before helping Batra, even though Mothra was clearly meant to save the Earth from threats like Batra. You can make up any kind of weird rules or backstory for your movie as long as you don't betray your own rules. And this movie completely betrays what it set up with the relationship between Mothra and Batra. There's no organic way for these two monsters to suddenly be teaming up. I'll close out with some more positives. I do like the fight scenes, admittedly, even though I'm so against the team up. Even when I was a kid, I could not understand why Mothra and Batra were suddenly teaming up against Godzilla. But the final battle is entertaining, even if it doesn't have as much impact as before, because it's just Ken Satsuma fighting two props on strings as opposed to another suit actor. And I do like the score by Akira Ifukube. Even though it's a lot of rehashed themes from the past, the Batra theme that he's made is pretty intimidating and fits well with the character. And he brings back the Maser Tank March from War of the Gargantuas, making its first debut in a Godzilla movie right here. So there's quite a bit that I do like about it, but I honestly can't recommend this movie at all. Just watch at your own risk. It does have its entertaining moments here and there, but if you're looking at this as a Godzilla movie, you are going to be downright disappointed. In fact, this is actually the movie that made me understand why people had an issue with Godzilla appearing so little in the 2014 version. In that movie, I think they utilized Godzilla well because it was the first movie of that particular series. But this movie, Godzilla has absolutely no reason to be in it whatsoever, and there's a point where you literally forget that he's in it. So, not a strong recommendation at all. I don't get the praise. And that's my review for Godzilla vs. Mothra. As I mentioned before, Mothra became so popular again with this movie that it spawned the Rebirth of Mothra trilogy, which I've already reviewed on Toho Month 2 years ago. And even though they're not great movies per se, or even good movies, I actually enjoy Rebirth of Mothra and Rebirth of Mothra 3 above this movie. 2, not so much. I'm not a big fan of Rebirth of Mothra 2. So getting back into the realm of Godzilla, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about what I consider to be one of the best of the second series, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. So until tomorrow, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on the movie, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there's only one.